You have an idea. You want to tell it to the world, but you don't know where to start. That's where Anchor comes in. They have the tools for you to edit, produce, and record your idea right from your phone or computer. It's the easiest way to reach and grow your audience. They publish for you to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all major platforms. And to top it all off, they match you with advertisers so you can earn from your passion and your wonderful idea. So tell me, what are you waiting for? Download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started and follow your dream. Welcome to Disruptive Adventism. My name is Jose Briones, and I'll be your host for this podcast. This podcast is about discussing the polemical statements and practices that are part of the Adventist fabric, which in turn shape this belief system to be unique and relevant for today's society. During today's podcast, we'll be having a discussion about digital evangelism with Justin Khoe, otherwise known as ThatChristianVlogger on YouTube. Justin is a digital missionary that tries to create content so that we can experience faith in the first person. We hope that you enjoy it, and with nothing else to say, let us begin. Justin, welcome to Disruptive Adventism. Thank you for allowing us to interview you, and we appreciate the opportunity. Before we start, please tell us a little bit about yourself. What are your future plans? What is That Christian Vlogger doing? What are the hobbies? What are some of the things that you have planned? Go ahead and share with us who you are.
For sure. Thanks for having me on. Love that there are other people out here trying to make an impact online with podcasting or YouTube, things like that. So I'm really stoked to be here. My name is Justin. As you mentioned, I run a YouTube channel called That Christian Vlogger. And every day I wake up and my goal is to try and figure out a way to use the internet to help people understand the Bible, to make it a little bit more practical by answering commonly asked questions about the Bible and wading into some of the more challenging and complex questions that a lot of times the church isn't really willing to wade into. I'm married. I have a little puppy named Ronan. I guess I should have given my wife's name before. That would have been better etiquette. My wife's name is Emily. My puppy's name is Ronan. We live in the Northwest Vancouver, Washington area. And I don't know. What's the plans for the future? For me, a large part of the plan, and I guess we'll be talking about this today, but the plan is to try and revolutionize what does missions look like in the day and age that we live in? And how does the internet, how does social media kind of play into all of that? Okay,
so you're a digital missionary. That's how you've been described as well in the past, correct?
Yeah, that's my preferred description for myself is a digital missionary.
Awesome. So let's start with some definitions.
Sure.
What is digital evangelism? And what is it not? And also, what is the contribution that Adventism brings to the table?
Yeah, for me, digital evangelism, digital missions for me is simply doing the same thing that we would do historically as a church. My background is as a coal porter and a Bible worker. I've done it for over 10 years, and I've estimated in the time that I've been a literature evangelist, I've personally knocked on over 100,000 doors. That's a lot of interactions with people. It's a lot of, literal blood, sweat, and tears. And the reason why I do it is because I believe in the mission and the message of the church. I believe that the gospel makes a difference, that Jesus makes a difference in people's lives, both individually as well as on a big picture. And when we apply that to our families and our communities and so on and so forth. And so for me, digital evangelism is doing the very thing that I would be doing in person, door by door by door, or perhaps church by church by church, and just taking that even larger. If the message matters and every one of those interactions has the ability to change a life, for me, the natural follow-up question is, how can I do that on a larger scale? How can I leverage technology to do that? And what took me 10 years to do, to knock on 100,000 doors, through the power of YouTube and social media, I literally now have the ability to do every single month. What took me 10 years to do in person, I can now do in 1 month online. And so for me, that's where the real power and the value comes from online ministry is you get to reach so many people from around the world in a way that you literally could never do in real life.
Awesome. So it seems to be very, by the numbers at least, it seems to be very, very powerful, and not only powerful, but effective.
I would hope so. I mean, that's kind of what I'm going for. I think a lot of that is still yet to be decided, because this whole field of digital missions is so in its infancy, at least within our church denomination. There are almost virtually no digital missionaries out there. And so part of what I'm hoping to do by my own channel and just kind of getting the word out there is inspire a generation of missionaries to rise up and say, you know what, rather than going overseas to Cambodia or Zimbabwe or somewhere out there across the seas, is say, hey, listen, we can serve as missionaries even from the comfort of our own room. And to try and challenge people to do that. And so hopefully we're going to have an impact. I mean, it seems like from the anecdotal stories that I've received that it is making a difference, but I think that's still something that needs to be tested and confirmed.
Right. With time, you'll find out the results. As with everything else, you can only see as time passes, as time goes by. Now, you talked about a little bit what digital evangelism and digital missionaries are. What is it not?
What is it not? I don't know. What do you mean by that question? You wrote that question down and sent it to me. I was trying to understand where you were coming from. What do you mean by what is it not?
Okay, so is digital evangelism is reaching others in the same way that we would do in the church today. But is there a replacement? Is it a replacement? Is it a supplement? Is it complementary? What is it? And what is it not? Going to do for you, or what is it not going to do for the church?
Yeah, great question. So in an ideal world, it does not replace the church, in my opinion. Instead, it kind of expands and redefines what the church was fully intended to be. Today, we have this perspective of the church as a building, and it's a place that we go and worship on the weekends, whether that's Sabbath or Sunday or whatever the case is. But that was never the intention of the church. Nowhere in the scriptures is church once defined as a place or a time. It's always been defined as a people who are in community, who are worshiping and serving. And so for me, digital missions is an extension of the church as it is meant to be. It's a way for people to engage in spiritual discussions every single day of the week. There are 168 hours every single week, and yet in the present kind of short-sighted definition of church, we only really are engaging in 1 hour out of the 168. And so going online allows us to actually engage in spiritual conversations and do missions in literally the 167 other hours that are in a given week. So ideally, it's not a replacement of church. It's simply an extension of, it's maybe even going back to what church was originally intended to be. It's just people doing life under the banner of Christ. But in a secondary way to answer the question, it is in a certain respect a replacement of church. And I know that a lot of people are very uncomfortable about this answer, but I think that this is just the truth. The most recent study from Barna Groups, it's a group of people who study Christian trends and things like that, stated that 59% of all Americans who were born and raised in the church ultimately end up leaving the quote unquote church. And as you dive into the research, they go on to say that while they are leaving the church, they are not leaving Christianity, at least according to the people that they've surveyed. They are done with the institution. They're done with the rituals and the rites. They're done with kind of the facade of church, but they're still very interested in deep and profound things like what's the purpose of life? How do I serve other people? How do I define morality and ethics? And how do I live my life? And how do I experience God on a personal basis? The studies have shown that young people are actually leaving church in attempt to keep their faith intact, which is, for anyone who's under the age of 35, like that, you understand where that's coming from. And I realize that not everyone who listens to this might immediately resonate with that thought, but this is statistically what we're seeing. We're seeing young people leaving the church. And so if that's the case, the follow-up question that I have is, well, if they're leaving the quote-unquote church but not wanting to leave Jesus, how can we continue to minister to them? How can we continue to speak into their lives if they're not showing up every week? And to me, social media is a way to do that. And kind of one of the kind of one of the assumptions that I make about my audience online is that for a good chunk of them, a good percentage of them, I will literally never meet in person, and they may never actually physically attend my church. And if that's the case, if I assume that, how can I still yet to be a blessing? How can I still lift Christ up in a reasonable way and kind of disciple and mentor and teach these people who are still very spiritually interested, but kind of disenfranchised from the organized church? So while I say ideally it doesn't replace the church, the reality is for a lot of young people that are listening to my content, it is a replacement of church for them. They're not going to church on the weekends. They'd rather go on a hike or spend time with their family and friends, but they're still asking the questions that people have asked since the beginning of time. And so, yeah, it is kind of also in a roundabout way replacing the church.
Okay. Well, that's very interesting that you mentioned that, since, they are, from what I'm gathering from what you're saying, is that they are still able to find the answers, but not go through the hurt that they've been put through, maybe through the institutional practices of the church and the denomination. That's
right. Whether that hurt is abuse or just, people who aren't very Christ-like, or just it's a place where they haven't gotten answers. We're seeing increasingly more and more young people are turning to Google and YouTube to find answers to the mundane questions like, how do I tie a tie, or how do I change my oil in my car? But then even in a much more meta level, they're asking big questions like, is God real? If so, why does he allow pain and suffering? Things along those lines. Whereas traditionally, we might have gone to our pastor to ask those questions and to learn more about the Bible and things like that. But that's just not the world that we live in today. And so to me, it makes sense to be in the very place that they're asking these questions.
Good. Well, thanks for your thoughts on that. Now, what is the specific contribution that Adventism brings to this conversation? I mean, Adventism is disruptive in its nature. It has a lot of crazy ideas, crazy practices. But what is it that it's unique? I mean, other Christian churches may do it, not only Christian churches, but also other communities. Like you have the gamer community with Twitch. You have the technology, just overarching community with, YouTubers like NKBHD or, other podcasters or whatever it is. So why is Adventism unique in this spectrum, and how is that manifestation happening today?
Yeah, I think that there is a lot that we as Seventh Day Adventists bring to the table that perhaps goes only met in a smaller degree by other ministries or communities. Specifically, our picture of God, I believe, really is the most complete and the most compelling picture of God. Simply put, like some of the distinctives that we believe, the nature of God as love, and how that's played out in a number of our different distinctive doctrines, whether that's the doctrine of hellfire and how God actually doesn't vindictively burn people without end, for eternity in hell. I think that matters to a culture that is so bent on social justice and the oppression of the oppression of those who are kind of at risk and things like that. Like this picture of a God who just couldn't care less and judges you for eternity based off of 70 years on this earth. Like that seems like a very vindictive and evil God. And I understand why a lot of people reject God because of this. And I think this is only amplified more and more with the emergence of social media and the ability to see things taking place on a global scale. So the Adventist picture of God as a compassionate and loving and merciful God, truly, I think that speaks volumes to people when they find those kinds of things out. The picture of a God who cares so much about you that he has set aside time to spend with you where you can unplug from the matrix and rest and engage in the things that truly matter for a 24-hour window every single week, engaging with family and community and really why you were created. Like I think all these things really do matter, and Adventism provides this picture of God in a way that other churches, I just haven't seen it as compelling yet.
Okay. Besides the theological points, what else is unique about Adventism in the digital sphere? Like what other contributions besides just the theological realm have you seen or have you experienced as, practicing Adventism?
I wish I had a better answer for that. I don't know. The reality is that the Seventh Day Adventist Church, at least in the circles that I've trafficked in, largely speaking, responds to anything that's new or current as far as social media and that whole world is concerned. Really just has a hands-off policy, like a runaway because it's bad and evil and wicked kind of a thing. There's a great quote that I found recently by Eleanor Roosevelt. He says, "It's much better to light a candle than to curse the darkness." And I love that because that sums up exactly what I'm trying to do and what I hope many others end up deciding to do when it comes to digital missions. But by and large, at least literally all the presentations that I've ever sat through when it comes to social media, whatever the case is, it's saying, hey, social media is bad, it's addictive, it changes your mind in a negative way, et cetera, with the ultimate conclusion being, therefore, you should delete your Facebook account, you should delete your Twitter, you should not sign on to YouTube, and instead you should just pray your Bible and sing your hymns and be a good little boy or girl. So I wish there was more that I've seen that Adventists have contributed to the online space, but the reality is I have not seen that to be the case.
Now, that is from the perspective of the organized church.
Yeah.
But if we remember, at least from the past, if we go back to the 19th century, right? Innovation is in the DNA of Adventism. Maybe we're not using it, but I think personally that innovation is within the DNA. I mean, you think about our pioneers and the printing press, radio, Christian missions, as in, going out to the world. And so is digital evangelism, or is that the 21st century manifestation of that DNA? And maybe we're just not tapping into it. Is that your point of view?
Yeah, I could see how that you'd make that case, but even with that, maybe not so much with the printing press. I think that you're right. Our church really did adopt the printing press, in its full power, and literature in general. But even when it comes to things like radio ministry, for example, even then we had a huge resistance to that. I mean, you've probably heard the stories that I've heard where people were saying, "Oh, radio's of the devil," it's like, it's just not good, or whatever the case is. And the guy who started it all, or at least was credited with starting it all, HMS Richards, had this vision and dream of doing radio ministry because that was the present day social media, as it were. That was a way for him to amplify his voice times 1,000, right? He decided that this is what he wanted to do, and it felt like God was leading in that direction. But when he went to the official church administration, if you know the story, they were not behind it. They said no, actually. They did not find value in funding and supporting in an official capacity radio ministry. And so what it required was HMS Richards to literally just go out in faith and do it on his own. And it wasn't until years later that the church finally conceded, okay, God is doing something in the radio world, and we shouldn't just stand by idly and condemn it. And so after the fact, they were open to it. And I kind of feel like that's what's happening right now when it comes to social. The social media world burst open at the seams, 10, 15, 20 years ago, depending on how you define it. Mm-hmm. And it's still, this discussion still is run away from it, curse the darkness because it's bad, and don't partake of it. And even with my conversation right now with church administration, many seem hesitant. They're at least saying, you know what, it's important. What you're doing, Justin, and other digital disciples, digital missionaries like yourself, keep doing it. But when it comes to really where the rubber meets the road, it's they're not willing to write checks on it yet because to them, they're not sure if it's a fad. They're not sure if it's really actually worth an investment, or I think that a lot of them are just scared. And very hesitant. And so I would love to say, yes, Adventists are great at innovation, but I think that would be a little naive given our history. I think that we're willing to go where things have been proven. And as far as taking risks, I don't see that happening very often. I think a lot of times that's left up to individual church members and people with a passion and a zeal. And years later, the church hopefully catches up.
So what I hear is that maybe in the organized fashion, we're lacking, but there are certain individuals that are kind of trying to go back to that movement mentality of like. Yeah.
I'm curious. What do you think about that? Do you agree with that? Do you think is what I'm saying an accurate portrayal of our history, or what do you think?
I think it's an accurate portrayal of our history. And I think that while it is true, when I see Adventism as a movement, not as an organized church, I see the potential. And it's just a matter of tapping in that potential, tapping to the potential that we can achieve. And I mean, that's one of the reasons why we started this podcast, the Disruptive Adventism, because I believe that Adventism has a message to give to the world. And the only thing keeping that message from reaching the world is fear. As you pointed out, money is a problem, is a concern, budget, mics, Skype interviews, like we're doing right now. And, it's hard, but I think that we have the potential, and it's just stop fearing, and go out there. Now, a lot of the backlash, right, is that a lot of people think that this new ministry, this new way of reaching others doesn't necessarily reach others. It's kind of just keeping them, let's say, outside of the church, right? As we discussed. And it's just like, I'm in my couch. I listen to Justin. I listen to Disruptive Adventism. Maybe I watch a David Asterisk video or, whatever it is. Right. But how has, That Christian Vlogger, your YouTube channel, and maybe other stories that you have heard from digital outlets within Christianity, connect YouTubers to the real world, to living their faith out there, quote unquote, and, maybe them encountering real community online or communities that were around them, but they just didn't realize it. Yeah,
such good questions. It's funny that you ask that, because literally today I posted a comment that I received this week, and it was someone asking for Bible studies on one of the videos that I created like 2 years ago. It's kind of crazy to think about that. Wow. Someone was asking, "Hey Justin, you offered Bible studies. Would you mind sending those over to me?" And that was the 2,334th person who had asked me for Bible studies since I started tracking it in 2017.
So you're saying, just to kind of,
go for it.
So you're saying that 2,334.
2,334.
34, okay. Undercutting by 17, but
yeah, come on, don't sell me short.
That's right. 2,334 people have requested Bible studies since 2017, not since you started the YouTube.
That's correct.
That's amazing. I mean, that to me is a testimony of what digital evangelism can do. But continue.
Yeah. So my point is that it's not a surface level thing. It's not just something that, people are watching to be entertained, which is one of the major kind of objections that I hear a lot about anything that happens to do with online ministry, whatever the case is. The other fear you mentioned is, what if people just stay home and they're not coming to church? My point is this. So what if that is the case? 59% of our young people are already leaving the church. Is it better for us, as they're leaving the church, for them to be able to at least have something that speaks into their life every single week, whether it's a podcast or a YouTube video that challenges them to grow spiritually? Is it better for them to have something like that? Or for the 59% of the young people who are already leaving the church to leave the church with no resources? So that, to me, which is the better outcome? The better outcome, of course, is for them to have something digital. But then you can also make the same argument with books. No one would argue that books or that written Bible study guides take away from the health and the vitality of a church, right? But you could theoretically replace anything that says digital ministry with the written word. But if I give them a Steps to Christ, or if I give them a Desire of Ages, or if I give them a Great Controversy, then they're going to be so filled with all that they need. They're going to have such health and vitality in their walk with God that they won't need to come to church. Like, no one makes that argument, because we all realize one of the ultimate fulfillments of a healthy and vibrant relationship with God is manifested in worship with community. And so if we are doing any line of ministry, whether that's in-home visitations, because you can make the same argument about that. If the pastor goes and visits them in the home, then they're not going to need to come to church because they've already seen the pastor that week. No, of course not. If the pastor is doing his visitations well, if the literature evangelist is meeting people effectively, and if the Bible worker is really doing their job, and if the digital evangelists are all working in line with the Spirit, we will see a manifestation of worship in community when God is working through them. And so rather than take away from what the church is trying to do, in my mind, ultimately it is supposed to help the local church body. And so I completely reject this notion that, through digital ministries, we are actually damaging the church body. I just find that completely ludicrous. I find that the kinds of people that spend time listening to your podcast, or the kinds of people that spend time watching my YouTube videos, are the kinds of people that are significantly more likely to go to church, because they find value in what we're sharing, what we're saying. And then when I say, hey, listen, one of the most important practices for me to thrive as a Christian, from my personal experience, is finding a community of believers. I think that speaks volumes, rather than just some other person saying, "Oh, you should go to church." Guilt. No, I think that kind of the example of it makes a big difference.
So you're saying that the product of digital evangelism is for people to live out their faith in the same way that regular evangelism or regular mission work will be affecting in the same way. So at the end of the day, for you, and I agree with that, digital evangelism allows people to live their faith and to look for the loving community that they're yearning for.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's 100% what I believe. And I know that is taking place with my community. I mean, I've had multiple occasions, literally last night, I had a friend from high school who's in my younger brother's class, messaged me on Facebook like no less than 12 hours ago saying, "Hey, Justin, I have a question. First off, my wife and I are expecting a baby in January. So if you would mind praying for us that we would have a healthy full-term pregnancy and all that kind of stuff." He said, "But secondly, we are wanting to find a church in the Phoenix area. We haven't been going to church for a while. We're wanting to find a church, and I believe that you're the person who can help me. Do you happen to have any contacts in Phoenix that can help us find a church where we could belong?" Listen, the only reason why he's asking me is because I am a digital missionary. I've had all but maybe 1 or 2 conversations with this person in real life. My brother was 3 classes below me. So when I was a senior in high school, I'm saying kid, he's going to be a father now. This guy that I'm speaking to was a freshman when I was a senior. So you know those dynamics. You don't really hang out with a lower classman. So I never talked to this guy. But here he is reaching out to me, advice, trying to find a church, and he's trusting me in the decision of where do I find a community, because I'm a digital missionary speaking into his life. That's all within 12 hours ago. So this idea that young people don't want a church, to me, that's so naive in my perspective.
That's awesome. I mean, it's a great testimony, and really taps into my question. Like, you seem to have a lot of experiences where people came to you and it's like, hey, I want to live my faith not only in the digital world, but also in real world. Okay.
And so I fully believe that, like, full stop, period, end of discussion. But I also want to add something else to that. What if the young people on the other end of the window never did go to a church? Would that actually be as bad as we think it is? I got a message from a viewer not too long ago saying, "Justin, you know what? I need your advice. I am the only Christian in my family, and there's no churches nearby. How do I grow with my relationship with God?" Right? I mean, that's ultimately what we are wanting from our listeners, our church members, or whoever. We want them to grow closer to God, and we think churches is a good way for that to happen. And so I responded to this commenter with my own perspective, with my own background in mind. Here I am living in like the Portland, Oregon area. I have access to the internet, Uber and Lyft, a car. There's churches left, right, and center, right? And so I'm telling her, I'm kind of speaking almost with like this frustration / tough love perspective. And I say, come on, stop making excuses. This is what I'm responding to her in the comments. So stop making excuses. I guarantee you, if you look on Google, just Google search churches near me, find a church, call them up and say, "Hey, listen, I'm a 15-year-old girl. I don't have a car. I'd love to attend your church. Can you help me?" I told her, I guarantee you that someone somewhere will be willing to pick you up, a church member, an elder, a pastor. They'll pick you up from your home and take you to church. And then I hit send, and I feel very like self-righteous about this answer. Like, yeah, that's what she needed to hear. She responds back to me shortly after and says, "I'm so sorry. I didn't explain my situation very well." She said, I live in a Muslim country.
Wow.
There are no churches where I live. I know 0 other Christians. And so here I am realizing that quite literally to this young lady, I am the church, because she has no ability to tap into an in-person body of believers. And so let's just think hypothetically, worst case scenario, all they do is listen online because they have no ability to go to an in-body community. Is that really that bad? Or could it possibly be that this 15-year-old girl is going to be strengthened in her walk with God and in her desire to live for Jesus because I'm online?
You're the only community she has.
Exactly.
That's an awesome story that honestly proves the need for, digital missions in the 21st century and, well, the centuries to come. Hopefully not too many. Hopefully a couple of years and Jesus is here.
Amen.
But, it's easy for you and for me. We kind of have started a ministry or an outlet, right, to give the message of Adventism, of Christianity to the world. I'm extroverted myself, so I find it kind of easy for me, right? Maybe churches, pastors, outspoken people, they're like, digital ministry, check. I like to share my thoughts all the time, right? But how can more introverted Christians pursue practicing faith in the digital world?
Yeah. Oh, great question. The first thing I would say is actually quite a number of digital personalities, or even just people who do ministry in general, are actually far more introverted than we realize. Out of my close circle of friends who do ministry, whether that's literature evangelism or preaching or do the digital thing, a good percentage of them actually are introverted. Some of the most charismatic and dynamic people that I know, that are on stage or on a camera, they tell me after they're done presenting what they've been called to present, they're saying, I got to go back to my hotel room. I got to go home and recharge because I'm actually an introvert. And so I don't accept that only extroverts can speak in that manner. I think that even introverts are some of the most effective communicators because they understand people perhaps better than extroverts do. So that would be the first thing that I would say. The second thing that I would say is, being a digital missionary doesn't have to look the same to everybody. I think that there are multiple roles within digital missions. Certainly there's the most obvious one. You're the content creator or host. You run a podcast, or you host a YouTube channel, or you write for a blog, or whatever the case is. Those are the most obvious. Actually, a blog right there. Even if you're introverted, you could write a blog. It doesn't matter how introverted you are because you don't have to talk to anybody to write a blog. That's one of the alternative ways that you can do it. But even if you're not a creator, there's other ways that you can support. The way that social media works is every like, every comment, every share matters. In the vast majority of social media platforms, there's this thing called the algorithm that weighs how much they're going to promote that specific post or video and how much they're going to suppress it. You know this to be the case because, you post your selfie of the day or the cases, and it's not the most attractive photo, let's say, and it only gets 10 likes. And then it just kind of dies there. But then you post on the same account, that you just got engaged. And in the first 24 hours, instead of getting 10 likes, you've gotten 50 or 100 likes. And over the lifetime of that post, you're getting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of likes. The reason why that's the case is because the algorithm realized that for whatever reason, that piece of content was deemed more valuable by your audience. There was more engagements, more likes and comments and reactions to whatever it was that you posted. And so one of the ways that you can actually assist in digital missions is by literally hitting the thumbs up button, literally hitting subscribe and commenting and sharing the video with your friends. It actually gets the word out there significantly greater. I'll give you an example. When I post a video, I would say it's fairly safe to assume that I can see anywhere between 2,000 or 3,000 views per video. That's fairly standard for me. But my videos also have the potential to reach, I think some of my highest view counts are in the hundreds of thousands. The only difference is the number of people who engaged and interacted with it. So even if you are introverted, you can find what kind of content you really value and support, and then go and promote, that piece of content as much as you can, and you'll actually aid in that word getting out.
So there's a space for everybody in the digital space.
No doubt.
Awesome. That's awesome. Well, another question that, and maybe we're starting to wrap up here. One of the questions that I have is like, okay, we know that YouTube is here. And for example, Instagram TV came out maybe
a month ago. Recently.
Something like that. Maybe like 2 months, 2 months ago. What's the next big thing? If we are behind, right? We're behind as a church. We can probably catch up, but maybe we should be looking at what's next. What's the next big thing, as Samsung puts in their phones, or Apple. Like, there's one more thing at the end of Steve Jobs'
presentations. Yeah.
Presentation. Yeah. So is it, I don't know. VR churches maybe, or what is it that we should be looking to?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know the answer to that because, the future is still somewhat undefined. I've seen the whole concept of a VR church before, and it's really intriguing. I've, gone to a number of presentations where, VR videos are presented, and they're really kind of cool. I've even seen people do like completely digital churches where there's like a digital campus. You put on your VR headset and you walk around the church and meet people. I've even heard of a guy who runs a church in a video game where he actually has a service every single weekend in this on a video game where people will log in and their avatars will show up on this specific place in this digital world, and they'll have a church service. I honestly don't know the answer to that, but I think one of the things that I would encourage us to wrap our minds around is, again, what is a church? Is a church a thing that happens on a given day at a given time? Or is church something more than that and more profound than that? If I have the opportunity to choose only one of two, and again, the ideal is to have both and many more, but if I had to choose between people showing up in person to a physical location at 9:30 in the morning, to 1 o'clock in the afternoon, or if you go to a Spanish church or a black church, to maybe 2 or 3 in the afternoon, but then not engaging with their faith the rest of the week. If I could choose between that, or no one ever shows up to anywhere in person, at least as a corporate gathering, but maybe they hang out with 2 or 3 friends here, 5 or 6 friends over here, but they're choosing to engage literally every single day in the form of blogs and videos and podcasts and just real life conversations. Which of the two would I prefer? Which of the two do I think is ultimately the healthier version of what a church is? I'm going to go with the second one every single time. Again, the ideal answer is both and, we're engaging every single day. Of course, I want to concede that. But if I had to choose between one of the two, I would go with the second one. And so I wanted to, I guess, just challenge the present understanding of what church means and what it means to be a member of the church. To me, it's much more broad than showing up on Sabbath and singing your songs and paying your tithe and listening to the sermon.
Well, thanks again for your thoughts. Maybe one more question before we wrap up is how cost effective is it to run digital missions?
It's very easy to do it at a break-even point where it doesn't cost you anything and you're not making any money from it. I mean, any person can do that. I mean, if you have any relatively recent iPhone or Android device, I mean, at any point in time, you can start posting on Facebook, you can write a blog, you can even go live streaming, and it's totally fine. With social media today, no one is expecting 4K video all the time. All the viral videos are always shot with an iPhone. So there's no reason why your iPhone can't work for digital evangelism. So that's not a problem. Where the challenge comes is if you feel like God is calling you to be a full-time digital missionary. It's not hard to be used by God to be a missionary in your workplace or with your family or with your friends. It's free. You just be a nice person, and you be gracious and kind to people, and you're willing to step up and share the gospel when God calls you to. But if you're wanting to move overseas and to make a career out of it, then you have to have people that believe in you and that support you. And you have to either be a tent maker like Paul, or just have a community of people that are willing to be patrons of your ministry. And so similarly with digital missions, it's the same challenge. Either you have to have a job while you're doing it in order to pay for the microphones and the cameras and the things like that. Like right here behind me on my wall right there, I have all my camera equipment that I use to make videos. Just one of those lenses is like $2,500. It's kind of ridiculous, really, when you think about how much money goes into production. You and I were just talking about before we turned on the recording, just getting a decent microphone for podcasts. It can be expensive quite quickly. Website hosting, editing, all this different kinds of things. So you either need patrons to support your missions, or you need to just be willing to work a job and kind of do it on your own time.
Well, thanks again for your thoughts. I think it's been a good discussion on digital missions, and I think the challenge that we have is a big one, but I think that we can accomplish it as soon as we remember that there's a space for everybody. Give us your final thoughts on digital missions. What's the message that we should take home today?
Yeah, I would really just want to challenge any listeners here to really take this idea of digital missions seriously. I don't think that God is calling every one of you who are listening to become a full-time digital missionary, like I believe that's what my calling is in life. But I do believe that God is wanting to work through you and use you. I think that this whole emergence of social media and technology really kind of in a roundabout way gives light to the whole question that God asked Moses, right? What is in your hand? And if Wall Street Journal's study is even remotely close to the truth, it's saying that millennials, you and I, are spending on average 18 hours a day consuming media in one way, shape, or form, whether that's a YouTube video or Netflix or a podcast or Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, or whatever platform is going to come and destroy all the other ones. We're on our phones like 24/7. Why not use that for the gospel's sake? It used to be that if you wanted to speak, a word to people around the world, you had to hop on a boat, find a donkey and ride off into the distance, or maybe get on a boat or a plane or something like that. Now you can actually broadcast your message to the entire world pretty much with a push of a button. And I think that this is something that we should not take lightly. I think that this is a blessing in disguise for us if we really take the charge seriously. And so I just want to challenge anyone listening to really think, what can you do to serve as a missionary in the digital world?
That was our interview with That Christian Vlogger and digital missionary Justin Khoe. If you like what you heard and you want to seek more, you can go to ThatChristianVlogger.com or to his YouTube channel, where he has plenty of content, discussions, and other things that can help you experience faith in the first person. Thank you for listening today. If you're enjoying the podcast or other content that we're producing here at Disruptive Adventism, we want to invite you to consider contributing through our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/Disruptive Adventism. Your contribution helps us continue to create a space where Adventism expands its relevance in today's society. I also hope that our content has intrigued you a little bit and that you decide to stay around for future podcasts. If you have any comments, feedback, or a topic you would like us to discuss, please go to our website at www.disruptiveadventism.org or shoot us an email to disruptiveadventism@gmail.com. We're eager to engage in discussions about any matter, so don't hesitate to contact us. This has been it for today. We hope you join us next time, and as always, we invite you to be disruptive.